Hi there, we're going to make some fresh mushroom soup today. This is a recipe from a neighbor of mine in North Syracuse. It makes about 6 cups, but it's really, really good. And I think you could argue it was either onion soup or mushroom soup because it has a lot of both in. So what I've got here is 2 cups of chopped onions. I did those in the food processor. It still made me cry. A half a teaspoon of sugar. A pound of mushrooms, half of them chopped in the food processor and half of them sliced. 1/4 cup of flour, all-purpose flour, 2 cups of broth, 1 1/4 cups of water, a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 of a teaspoon of freshly ground pepper, a half a cup of dry white wine or vermouth. We're using vermouth today. And then in my pot, I have 4 tablespoons or a half a stick of butter that's already been melted. So I'm going to turn my flame on underneath my big soup kettle, just about to medium. I'm going to add the onions and the sugar. We're going to let those saute until the onions start to turn a little bit brown. Stirring every once in a while, so I'll let those start to get hot, and then I'll check them in a few minutes. It's probably going to take 10 to 15 minutes for these to saute to the point where they're starting to get brown. The sugar is going to help them caramelize a little bit. So you can see that our onions are starting to brown up a little bit and caramelize. I'm going to add all of my mushrooms, both the chopped mushrooms, and these are finely chopped because I did them in the food processor. You can also chop them by hand and they don't have to be chopped up quite that finely. And then the sliced mushrooms, and these are baby bellas. You can use any kind of mushroom. We're going to give that a stir. Mushrooms have a lot of moisture in them, so they're going to not need quite as much fat as the onions did. We're going to give this a stir, turn the heat down a little bit, and we're going to let these cook for about 5 minutes. Then we'll check in with it. We'll add the flour, which will help give us a little bit of a thicker soup, and we'll start adding some of the other ingredients. So our mushrooms have really exuded quite a bit of water. They've cooked down nicely, and I've sprinkled in the flour. I'm going to give that a stir. And we're going to cook this for 2 minutes, pretty much stirring most of the time. You can walk away from it for a few minutes, but you don't want to let it sit, or that flour is going to cook to the bottom of the pan. It doesn't look very pretty right now. I don't know if you can see it. It kind of looks like mud, but it smells really good. So we're going to cook that for 2 minutes. I've got my timer going, and we'll check in a minute. Okay, we're back. Our mushrooms and onions, butter, sugar, and flour have been cooking for about 2 minutes. We're going to add in the water. Like I said, this soup certainly doesn't get the prize for looking pretty. It actually looks pretty bad right now, but trust me, it's going to be wonderful. So I'm going to stir in the water just until everything's smooth. And then we'll add everything else. So I've got my 2 cups of broth, and I'm just using vegetable broth from bouillon. Pepper. Salt, which you can adjust if you don't want as much salt as the recipe calls for. And then a half a cup of vermouth or red or white wine, which you can also leave out if you don't care to. The alcohol cooks off, so you don't have to worry about getting drunk from your soup or feeding this to kids. And right now what I'm smelling is the vermouth, but we're going to let this cook for a few minutes, and then we're going to give it a taste and see how it is. So our soup is done. Our mushroom soup is done. You can see it does not take the prize for looking pretty, but let's see how it tastes. Yeah, really good with some smoked gouda or some crusty bread. We've got those chunks of onions that are all caramelized in there, and the chunks of small pieces of mushrooms. It's really, really rich. Really rich. I recommend this soup.